So FAST stands for Final and Ultimate Solution to Spam Problem. So this was happening every time people will come up with a brilliant idea saying, why don't we charge people for email? Or why don't we spend a lot of CPU cycles on the machine to send an email? And of course you tell them, well, do you know about all the botnet computers that are used to send email? Or they will say, why don't we send the challenge response every time somebody tries to email to you? And you tell them, well, do you guys know about email spoofing and the blowback problem and all those things? Then they come and say, well, let's use machine learning. That was like 10 years ago, right? Let's use Bayesian filtering. And that worked well for a period of time until spammers figured out that they can just inject a whole bunch of hashbusters or keywords to fool the system. So that was FUSP. And what was strange to me is that nobody ever used the same acronym for Final and Ultimate Solution to Malware Problem. So that's essentially what my talk is about today. And spoiler alert, such a thing does not exist. But the important part is not the goal, right? It's not about finding the final and ultimate solution to malware problem. The goal is, it's all about the journey, the steps that we make trying to get there, right? That's what keeps the world secure. So in the good old days, just to take a step back a little, year 1992, I was still a student in the Russian university. That was my first encounter of the computer virus. So computer viruses back in the days looked like this. Some of them looked like that, right? The peripherals looked like, you still remember the bzz, bzz matrix printers, right? So I put a picture of the printer there because that's what the first virus that I encountered did, right? It was injected into the printer driver. And my roommates, they were trying to print their final diploma work to present to their professor later in the day, and they come running to me saying, Dmitry, after every comma in the document that I printed, there is a swear word, right? Like, I cannot give it to a professor, what's happening? Well, in Russia, like, I was trying to come up with an example here on the screen, but the thing is that in Russian, there are actually swear words that you can put after every comma and still have a fluent conversation. Some people do that. So that was my first encounter. This is like the viruses back then, they were just a form of digital graffiti, right? They can do damage, but obviously not at the level where it happens today. Back in the day, I thought, well, the guys who do antivirus software, and I think I tried to use Dr. Web and clean up that machine pretty well, worked perfectly. Those guys are super smart, right? You just can't believe that somebody can go and reverse engineer the virus software and write the signature. And back in the days, it was big news. Every time you see a new virus, it's big news, right? So the labs will bring it in, they will analyze it, they will write the signature, they will phone their customer, and they will dictate the signature, right? I'll pass it on the floppy disk. You might know about the ICAR test sample, right? The ICAR is actually a software that is used for virus testing, for antivirus testing, and you can also, dictate it over the phone, because it's all ASCII. So if you fast forward a little bit, and this is the slide that I often use in my presentations. I steal it from the company called avtest.org, and this is the antivirus testing organization. So to test antivirus, no matter whether you like the mythology or not, they need to attract a lot of malware. And then they measure how much new malware they get every year, and you can see this literally a hockey stick type curve that shows the growth of the problem we had over the last decade. And this slide doesn't really do justice to what is happening out there, right? Because you can easily, it's all about malware families, which obviously there's a finite number of those, packaged and repackaged in so many ways, so you end up with millions of samples, right? Doesn't really do justice, but illustrates the problem that we're facing. So obviously the security industry needs to respond to that, needed to adopt. So we had a lot of diversification. So the anti-malware protection, what we started with 20 years ago, it's still here. It's still very, very relevant, both on the endpoint and the network. But we also learned a hard way that a patient and determined attacker will eventually succeed in breaking your defenses and yada, yada, yada. So there was a lot of additional products and services that came up. So going from the intrusion detection to remediation of the attacks, security analytics, incident response, you name it, right? Long, long, long list. And this is great, but the important part to note here is that there is most of all these technologies, they come after the protection piece, right? So it starts with protection, and when protection fails, you need to deal with the incidents. And the reason I'll focus on protection part today, first and foremost, and the reason is because that's what, that's the ultimate kind of the holy grail of security, right? Because if you, you may have all the intrusion detection systems in place, but how many incidents do you really want to deal with? You're gonna look at one incident that the protection failed you on, or do you want to look at thousands a day, right? The answer is obvious. The other reason is if you look at the protection, and I don't play games much, but this one I actually like. So this is the almost like a tower defense game with Plants vs. Zombies. So you put a lot of protection layers on the way to keep zombies out of your house, and most of the time it works great. When it doesn't, you deal with, it's up to the detection. Is the zombie in your house? But in a lot of cases, it's already too late. The zombie ate your brain, right? So when we talk about ransomware, it's already encrypted your files. What are you going to do? When you talk about, banking trojans, it might have already siphoned your, money from your bank account or took your password. So in a lot of cases, it is pretty late. You're just doing damage control. That's why we have this relentless journey to keep the protection levels up. Okay. So if another analogy here could be the, I don't know, castle walls, right? So if you have big and strong walls, they don't need to be beautiful, just big and strong, right? Then you can keep the attackers away, and that's what we do essentially. We just make those walls bigger and stronger every day. So if we talk about best protection requirements, what is it that we're looking for? So first of all, it needs to be as proactive as possible, because if it's not proactive, you fail. You're down to the detection remediation stage. And it needs to be proactive from the user's point of view. It may not be proactive from my point of view necessarily. Maybe, we take the sample into the lab and we look at it, it's like, wow, we didn't detect it, let's add detection. But as long as we do it before the users in our customer base has it, that's all good. No false positives. Of course, there's no such thing as no false positives, but in the protection industry, that's the target we set for ourselves, right? You don't start with, hey, let's build a technology that will detect all the malware and will have 10% false positive or 2%. Like, no. When you build protection, you do not knowingly produce false positives. They only happen as an accident. It also needs to have acceptable performance impact. You cannot spend all the CPU cycles on your machine just scanning every single file for, matching the bytes. No, you need to optimize it pretty well. And it also needs to have a low management overhead. Like, you don't expect to, offer services to an organization that will have an anti-malware, large anti-malware team. Some big companies do, but a lot of small and medium businesses, they don't. They just expect the technology to work. So if you look at the attacks today, and they look quite complex. So this is the graph that illustrates the Cerber ransomware deployed over the so-called ROC exploit kit, and I believe the green circles, they represent processes, and there's a file activity, registry activity, and processes launch and spawn other processes and things like that. So if you zoom in, so most of the web exploit kit attacks, they start with the user visiting infected website. That's pretty straightforward. And then it runs the JavaScript, often obfuscated, that tries to bring a whole bunch of exploit components. And in this case, Flash exploit was one of the most prominent. The exploit will spawn shell. The shell will drop another piece of JavaScript on your computer, and it'll actually run it with the wscript.exe, which will download an encrypted payload over the HTTP, right? So not just an exe file, but an encrypted blob, and it will decrypt it to disk. And then it will run another shell to take that decrypted exe and execute it, and that's when you effectively have the Cerber ransomware infection. So it is getting pretty complex. It's not like the the virus that will just run from your floppy MBR as it was in the days, but it's also in some ways it is good, because what you can do, you have a lot more opportunity to put the defenses in place. So you can obviously start with a traditional approach, which is to block the malicious executable, but we know that they packed and repacked so many times that eventually they will break your defenses by just trying it on VirusTotal. Well, then you can take it, step back and look at the malicious Flash files. Can we detect the malicious files? In a lot of cases, we can, and it's great if we do, because we can stop it earlier. We don't need to worry about the exe payload. We can just stop it at the exploit time, and we can we can block the JavaScript downloader because it does something dodgy. In a lot of cases, it's obfuscated in a lot of bizarre ways, and you can pick it up. One of the most successful techniques that we've tried is actually blocking the exploit kit JavaScript. So this is when you look at the very first thing that comes into the endpoint trying to load all the malicious components. That works really, really well, except when it breaks, right? And then if you take it all the way up to the part where the exploit is happening, that's kind of the bleeding edge of the technology that was introduced in the recent years, which is called exploit mitigation. So you're looking at you're not trying to detect a specific exploit, or you're not trying to detect a specific JavaScript, because you will inevitably fail, and of course you will have other layers to pick it up, but sometimes they won't. So with exploit mitigation, you're looking at the ways of how malware behaves when it actually when it exploits vulnerable code inside your browser or your plugin or Java. And there is a limited number of techniques that the exploit use, and if you know those techniques, and if you inject your defenses in the right place of the operating system to monitor for those behaviors, then you can end up with a very proactive exploit mitigation technique. So there's roughly about 20 techniques that are out there, and the successful attacks will use some of them, and if you can recognize them as it happens, boom, problem solved. 100% signatureless, like you don't need to worry about updating your signatures. Problem is, if there is a new technique that you don't recognize, if there is a variation of that technique, that is also not bulletproof. It works really, 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 really well, except when it doesn't. Okay. The other problem with this approach is that and I'm not going to read all the different exploit mitigation techniques that exist. There's just some of them listed here, so to give you an idea. The other problem is a lot of malware these days doesn't spread via exploit kits, but it spreads via social engineering attacks and email spam. You're all familiar with it, but just to put things in perspective, this is what the spam traffic looked like over the last year. So it might be hard to see, but the colors represent different types of attachments. So whether it's a Visual Basic script, or if it's the JavaScript, or maybe JavaScript in the form of a WSF file, Windows scripting format or framework, or maybe it's even a zip file with an exe inside, also have it. And you can see that on certain days we had almost 45% of all spam that is sent out to be of this malicious nature. Huge problem. So what are you going to do there? So this is what the spam attack looks like in case of the attack we observed last year, that was bringing the Loki ransomware and the Kofter at the same time. So if you zoom in, spam email received by Outlook.exe process. Spam attachment is open. Of course, why would you open the spam attachment that says delivery receipt.zip? That runs Windows Explorer, which unpacks the zip file, and then there is a .lnk file inside, which is the Windows shortcut file. And of course, users do click on that file as well. Why they wouldn't? And that launches a PowerShell. And the PowerShell loads Kofter.exe, it loads the Loki.exe, and it also opens up Microsoft Word with an open like decoy document, so that when you click on a document that has .lnk extension, you kind of expect the document to show up on your screen, and that's what it's doing. So again, we can inject different levels of technology here, and it'll work great, except when it doesn't. And then you look at this whole graph and think, why, can I just correlate all this activity and have this kind of behavioral based detection? So I just wrote like, don't try to to compile it, because that's just the logic that I was in my head that I translated to the pseudo language. So if the file name has a .lnk extension, and it came from Outlook.exe, so it was dropped by Outlook process, and it tries to launch command shell and lost audio. Oh, it's all good. And the command line actually matches on the PowerShell.exe, which is great. And then the PowerShell actually downloads an executable file. How often will that happen in a legitimate use case scenario? Probably never, right? So you describe this logic, and it works really, really well to stop these attacks. Problem is, you soon find out that that great match that you had on the command cmd.exe launch in PowerShell, you'll start seeing it spelled like this with lots of obfuscations. Anything great, the obfuscating stuff, that's a good sign. I can make my detection stronger, but that means that you need to update your detection nevertheless. And then you notice that all the detection that you've created for like PowerShell and CMD and Excel detection, all of a sudden they switch to JavaScript. Or they no longer use Excel and Word, they now use Microsoft Publisher. Some people still use it for some reason. Or they will use shta.exe to bring the JavaScript payload through. Or maybe they'll switch to VBS or jar, but there's so many different combinations. Like one of the interesting cases we observed was when the command.exe doesn't even have this PowerShell string, but it comes from an environment variable that was written into by the JavaScript at the earliest stage of the attack. So I mean, it works really, really great, except when it doesn't, and you still need to update your protection logic. So why don't we take it all a step back and look at the behavior of the malware by putting it into the sandbox and detonating it. So you're all familiar with the concept. Detonate malware in a safe environment, observe the behavior, make the decision right there. Works brilliantly, except when it doesn't. So there's a big increase in the malware that is sandbox aware, and there's a lot of, there's limitless number of techniques that they can employ to recognize that they're running inside the sandbox and refuse to reveal its behavior. So simple examples are like, how many CPUs do I have? A lot of people start their sandbox and just like, okay, I'll have a VM with one CPU, while most machines do have multiple CPUs on board, and malware will be like, oh, there's only one CPU, it's got to be a VM. It was an interesting case when we tried to detonate a Word document in a sandbox, and it doesn't really do anything. It's like, hey, this is a malicious document. It should go and connect to the internet, download exe file. And then we realized that the VBA code that it has inside is looking at the recent menu and trying to see how many recent documents you had on your machine, right? And if there's none, it means there's no active real user on the machine, right? It's like refuses to work. Or there is a concept called fingerprinting. So because you don't have infinite number of VMs, when the malware actors spread their attacks, they can fingerprint the hardware, they can fingerprint the network that you're running in, and they collect all this information, and they can say, oh, we see a lot of detonation in the network or environment that looks like this. So when we see it again, and that's embedded in the malware code or embedded in the network response that we sent, then don't do anything, right? Just hide yourself. Is it running in the right country? Like we see malware that is targeting Europe specifically, or targeting Germany in Europe. If it sees being detonated in North American network, it will refuse to do anything. It'll make a GeoIP lookup to determine where it is, and all bets are off. Am I in the targeted network? So if it's a targeted attack, and it attacks a specific company, it expects to see a callback from that company's network, not from the security provider. So lots and lots of different mechanisms for sandboxes to bypass. And I mean, it's good when we see it, because in a lot of cases it is a malware sign, and we can put it in, but you still need to respond. You need to respond a lot less frequently than you do with the binary signatures that the traditional antivirus world, but you still need to do that. So fast forward to 2017, we've got so many technology on both the network and, well, mostly talking about the endpoint here, but so many different protection technology on the endpoint side. We have runtime detection, we have reputation systems where we just have a lot of automation looking at, is it a bad file, is it a bad URL, let's just put it in the cloud, and when we see it again, we'll block it. Is it a malicious traffic emanating from your machine, doing the generic exploit mitigation? There is this really good technology that exists right now that does anti-ransomware detection. So when it looks for ransomware behavior specifically, when ransomware, gets on your machine, it opens your Word document, and it encrypts it and writes another, encrypts that Word document, and you can look at it, it's like, well, it's not a Word document anymore, so it must be a ransomware attack, and you detect it, and then ransomware adapts to that as well, and instead of writing into the same document, they will write a new document, a new file, and then they delete the old one, and you have to adapt to that technique. Or they will not even use the file system APIs anymore. They will go straight to your disk, right? Or they will go into the MBR and will do it there. So you keep trying, you keep improving things. So and some of you might have wondered, it's like, hey, why don't we just turn the problem upside down? Why don't we just only let the good files to run? That's a brilliant idea. And there are some products that do exactly that. So they can look at the digitally signed applications, digitally signed programs. So if it's signed by Microsoft, you can verify the digital signature. What else do you need, right? Please come in. You can look at the trusted installers. If it's a Microsoft installer, Sophos, Google, just trust whatever they bring in. Or you can, obviously there's a long tail problem, and you can build your huge database of whitelisted hashes, and you can let them in. And well, the problem with the approach that is also not bulletproof, there is this long tail of custom and legacy applications that you have to deal with, and you will always be a little bit late there. There is this one-time apps and niche apps that you will not have a reputation for, so you're going to deny their entry into the system. Digital certificates, we know they can be lost, they can be stolen. There could be exploits either in the application level or on the OS level that bypasses this as well. And in the case of targeted attacks, you can compromise the admin tools, you can compromise the Windows management interfaces, and you can still get through the whitelisting system. But the one that's probably most interesting is the emergence of the script malware, when it's not even the executable file that you can have a reputation for, but it's the PowerShell that comes in and does whatever it wants on the computer. And fileless malware doesn't even touch the disk, right? There's no exe, it just injects into existing process and stays there. On top of that, huge usability impact, right? So you need to have a high maintenance cost. Whenever you have an alert about somebody trying to install a new executable file that isn't trusted, you need to go and figure out what it is. Is it really clean? Can I bring it into my network? Hide, total cost of ownership as a result. But nevertheless, it's really, really good for certain use cases. So when you talk about servers, right? You want to deploy a server out there with a specific set of software that you want to run and keep up to date. You don't want anything else on that server. Works great, yeah. Or if you have a kiosk or maybe a school environment, those environments, this works, pretty well. The other thought I would offer here is that as the Microsoft Windows platform follows the other platforms, specifically on mobile, and moves everybody to this app store model where everything is signed, everything needs to come from the marketplace, then the whitelisted solutions, they will either grow in importance because that's essentially everything is signed, so it becomes easier, or may even become redundant because Microsoft is gonna do it for you basically, right? So we didn't compare slides with Rafi, but I noticed that the robots on our slide deck look very similar. You might have heard all this news about the rise of the machine. They're going to take our jobs, right? Robots will destroy our jobs. You're not ready for it. Yeah, this is my favorite. This is recent, right? Goldman Sachs automated trading replaces 600 traders with 200 engineers. Yeah, we are coming for you, overpaid bankers. That's what it says there. So I read all this news, and I have kids, right? And I'm like, kids, this is really important. What I'm going to tell you is really, really important. So there will be robots, and they're going to take all the jobs away. But there is one job that will stay, right? It's software development. Somebody needs to program those robots. So my son, and obviously he gets most pressure from me, and I bought him an Arduino board a few weeks ago. I was like, son, here's the Arduino board, and you really need to learn how to hack things, right? You're Russian, it's in our blood, and and besides, that will be the only thing that that will be in demand 20 years from now. So I never thought that'll have worries about job security, right? You just do antivirus work, and it's needs human brain, and then this thing happened. And I talked to the guys from the company that builds the deep learning antivirus, which is now part of Sophos family. I'm like, these are very brilliant data scientists, and I can't stop but thinking that they are working on algorithms that essentially automate what we are doing. And my second thought was that it's actually great, right? Because it's not going to solve the entire problem, right? So it's still it's still be a demand for the experts to kind of work on the hard problems, right? So we let the machine, we let the robots to do the difficult part. So if you look at the my first impression of what I see there, proactive by design. So you train your model so that it's proactive. You don't need to update signatures. You build it on the known sets of malware and clean software, and it works really, really good at picking up new stuff. It actually shows very high efficiency rates, okay? So it detects a lot of stuff, which is great. And it also lets you configure your true positive and false positive settings. So you can choose how aggressive you want to be on malware versus how much you can do with the tolerate on the false positive side. But where it really shines is solving this long tail problem. So if you look at this, the number of malware samples out there, or how many gets uploaded to VirusTotal every day, that's just crazy. You cannot have humans looking at each one of those files and creating signatures, updating signatures. You really need to have really smart automation behind it, and that works beautifully on the long tail of the problem. Except when it doesn't. So first of all, there is this true positive and false positive trade-off. So you have this thing called ROC Curve, ROC, which shows you the dependency between how good your detection rate is versus how, what is the expected FP rate. And you really need to decide where you're going to put the dot, right? So if you can't tolerate false positives, your detection rate is going to be lower. So you need to be very creative in how you mitigate the false positives and, how to optimize those trade-offs. It will be slower to respond to new malware, right? So if you update your data model infrequently and you don't publish updates every day, any change in the problem domain that that impacts your technology, you'll be slower to react to. And this, we already see that cybercrime is adopting to it, right? There is a number of players in the machine learning antivirus industry, and they already been attacked by the cyber criminals. Well, there's a lot of things you can do. You can obviously go and take the legitimate applications, you can Trojanize them in a way that machine learning system looks at it as like, hey, this looks like a legit app, right? It doesn't analyze every single byte, it doesn't emulate and doesn't reverse it, so it just looks good on the surface. It has challenges obviously with non-exe software right now. Of course, you can try to apply machine learning to script malware, and a lot of people are working on it right now, but it's not there yet. Fileless attacks, what are you going to do about those? There was this interesting case that I saw just a couple of months ago. There was this spam attack with ransomware, and it used the NSIS installer. And you take that installer, and it's clear that it's malicious because it brings all this ransomware along, and you unpack it, and it's just an archive. You unpack it, and you don't see anything malicious inside that archive. It's just some random images, random text files. It's like, where's malware? I know it's malicious. Where's malware? Turns out that an NSIS installer can be scripted, right? And all the logic, all the malicious logic is inside that script. So the file looks pretty benign until you go into that scripting layer, and you need to be prepared for it. I think, yeah, file infectors, we might actually see them coming back, again, trying to bypass the machine learning technology, compromising legitimate applications in an automated way. Why not? So, if we look at the attack complexity and how it grew over the years, and this is just my random thoughts of what it might look like. It's obviously very hard to measure. And if you look at a technology status quo, it's like, hey, let's not really do anything and just keep things the way they are. With the growth of attack complexity, you're going to have this big gap created, right? This big protection gap. So what you really need to do is that you need to constantly innovate in the protection technology. You need to have this relentless technology advancement that is trying to bridge this gap. Sometimes get ahead of the criminals, sometimes lag behind, but then get ahead again, and it's just inevitable. You have to do that, right? That's our only choice. Is just keep inventing new technology, keep bringing it in, not to get the point where we have final ultimate solution to the malware problem, but just to stay in the game, just to stay relevant. So to wrap up, the winning strategy is continuous technology advancement, relying on the modern stack. So whatever technology can offer you today, on the protection side, you just need to put it in. You need to retire the stuff that no longer works, and you need to bring and execute really, really well on the stuff that is helpful. You need to have a large amount of overlap in your protection technology, because if you don't, nothing is bulletproof, and the eventually attacks will get through. And you also need to retain this really fast response to changes, because things On the cyber side world, on the cyber threats world, things are not going to stay the same. They will evolve, and you need to have this ability, and you need to have smart guys working for the security companies to recognize when there is a shift, to understand what is happening, and to be able to build technology that responds to it. The risks to the strategy is, yeah, I think what is happening with the platforms generally. Like if you look at the mobile, Android or iOS, and if Mac OS, you start looking at the window where Windows is heading. The platform owners, they do try to restrict them. In a lot of cases, they do it for security reasons, right? If you can only install applications from our store and we validated everything and it's good, then there will be no malware on our platform. I mean that's great, but we know that isn't always true, and malware gangs, they do find their ways to get malware into the Android store or into the Windows store as well eventually. Also means lack of security APIs. So if the platform is restricted, your protection technology isn't able to see what is actually happening, what is going on. So you're kind of at the mercy of the vendor to protect their platform, and because they will always be targeted, they will always miss certain attacks, right? Things like Internet of Things, right? Like have you guys seen an antivirus running on one of those IoT devices? No, it doesn't exist, right? And we see the results of that. So the worst thing that can happen is say you have your mobile phone and you trust your vendor with security, and it's a secure platform and release patches frequently, but you cannot have an anti-exploit technology on your mobile phone from another security vendor. You kind of need to trust your platform vendor. So how would you know that your mobile phone is exploited? So if you use Android and Google doesn't tell you that you have an exploited phone, how would you know if you don't have all the inspection points available to a security vendor? So that's the end of my talk. Looks like I did well for time. There's a few things. Most of you probably don't care for that stuff, but if you like free software, then we have a lot of it. And questions?